Welcome to Faith and Politics, a show dedicated to discussing issues surrounding the intersection of church, state, and politics, and the examination of whether you are allowing your faith to shape your politics or your politics starting to shape your faith. In other words, what do you do when God and government come face to face? I'm your host, Orlin Johnson. Let me introduce you to our guest panelists for today. First, we have with us Ms. Joy Mosley, Vice President of Government and Strategic Relations for the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. We have Dr. Andrew Polk, who's a professor of history at Middle Tennessee State University and the author of the critically acclaimed book, Faith and Freedom, Propaganda, Presidential Politics, and the Making of an American Religion. We also have Mr. Rashawn Baker, who's the president and CEO of the Baker Strategy Group and a former member of the Maryland House of Delegates and a former county executive. And lastly, we have Dr. Wilmer Leon, nationally syndicated columnist and a regular contributor to national and international television news programs and newspapers. Great having you all here with us and looking forward for our show. You know, we have an interesting situation where we have a California mayor that had ordered a Christian mom to stop praying at a city council meeting. The mayor of Ventura actually ordered an individual by the name of Tarin Swain to stop praying during her time for a public comment at a city council meeting. You know, Tarin is a mother and she's a devout Christian, and she actually prepared a 3-minute speech to express concern about some policies that were affecting her children. But because of the number of speakers, the city cut each person's time to only 60 seconds. So she waited and didn't know exactly what to do. But since she only had a minute, she bowed her head and began to simply pray and decided that's what she would use her 60 seconds for. Immediately when she started praying, there was booing, there was shouting, and individuals were basically in an uproar. They were interrupting her. Some were even saying, "Stop, we don't do prayer here." Some of the crowd were applauding and they were cheering that the mayor was stopping it. But we found out that there's some legal issues that were created, and a letter was eventually sent to the mayor's office, who ended up having to apologize in some form or fashion as a result of not allowing speakers to pray. You know, when you take a look at this particular situation and you wonder, Andrew, when you want to figure out how to be balanced, when you want to make sure that people are allowed to kind of be who they are, but in the same breath, you want to make sure that you're not turning a public comment period into an opportunity for people to be demonstrating their faith. What do you do in these situations? Have they gone too far? How do you go about making interpretations? Because it seems like folk don't even know what to do, and you can't operate on the fly.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, several of the, most of the topics we talk about on this show are in kind of the messy middle, right? The gray areas of religious liberty that we're not sure of. This is not one of those. I mean, right? It's an opportunity for citizens to come up and speak. The mayor has the right to limit this, the council, depending on how many people are there. But to me, the funniest part of this is a previous citizen had come up and used his 60 seconds with his bird puppet and his ukulele. And that was perfectly fine and free speech and nothing disrespectful, but this woman comes up and prays, right? And even if you have an issue of, well, she's praying in public and Jesus going into the closet and maybe she's weaponizing, but none of it matters. If you give citizens the opportunity to come up and speak, they can speak what they want to speak, right? This has to be a foundational thing. There are a lot of areas that are gray in our country right now of religious liberty. There has to be a baseline of just freedom of speech and freedom of religion in these instances. I just feel like if this becomes muddy, man, I don't know exactly where we go from here.
Leon, is this a bridge too far?
Well, I think a couple of things here. One, there's a political aspect of this in terms of how the mayor decided to manage this. But I think it's always important to remember in situations like this that free speech isn't absolute and freedom of religion isn't absolute. And a city council meeting based upon the concept or construct of separation of church and state is not the space for prayer. That's not the space. Now, we're talking about a minute of time, and Could the mayor have managed this another way?
Yeah.
I believe that the mayor could have. But from a strict technical perspective, again, we're not dealing in absolutes here. The prayer seems to me to be more of a personal reflection as opposed to a public expression. And so I can clearly understand why people in the audience were upset in the manner in which they were, because technically that is not the space for that to be done.
Well, Joy, when you see this, though, and I guess as somebody who's kind of worked in representing religious organizations, it's very clear that if it's a religious organization, this is what is expected. But I guess the issue is, if I'm going to let a guy with a parrot do something when he gets this free minute, why would I stop somebody who decided they wanted to use their minute for prayer? It seems as though everyone's getting very, very queasy about how do I show my religion in a public space, but in the same breath, I can allow many other things to take place that may have nothing to do with this particular council meeting as well.
Right, I think that's a great point. And so places are allowed to set time, manner, restrictions, different things like that to say, there's a lot of people who are going to speak. We're going to limit you to 60 seconds. You can do these time, place, and manner restrictions that apply to everyone. But what you can't do is engage in viewpoint discrimination, which is what happened here, where everyone gets to say their own viewpoint except the person who has a religious viewpoint. That's pretty textbook viewpoint discrimination, which would not be permissible.
And Sharon, you've been in the legislature where for a time there was a real big issue that you guys wanted to start with prayer, but then they wanted to tell you what kind of prayer you could actually start with. I mean, it almost makes you wonder, should you just forget about it altogether or ban that completely, or does that even create a problem?
You know, I will say this one. The example that's in this case is something that I went through for 8 years as county executive. You present your budget to the public. They have 3 minutes to come up and say whatever they want. We've actually had people pray for a budget that was more conducive to what they want to do with the city's money, and so, or county's money. And so what we've taken the posture of, as Andrew said, is that, it is your 3 minutes. You can say what you want as long as it doesn't, cause a riot or anything like that. But we've had people pray. We've had people come up there and just yell at us. So it's pretty loose when you do it. And this is the type of thing where these hearings are different from the example you gave in the beginning when you're at the legislative body and you have to be there as a legislator and somebody opens up a prayer. Usually in these type of forums, yeah, they'll bring their dog in to tell you why they need a dog park. You name it, they've done it. We've just let them do it as long as it didn't cause a riot.
Well, it sounds like, Wilmer, what we're looking at here then, as long as whatever you're doing doesn't cause a riot, I mean, you could come in there and maybe preach for about 3 minutes if that works for you. If it's your free time, it's your free time. Or is it a situation where we're now putting other people in a position where they have to put up with things that maybe they didn't come there for?
But I think with some of this, we're overlooking the nature of prayer. And prayer as a personal religious reality is different than your parrot, and it resonates differently with different people. So you could have Muslims in the room that say, you know what, that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to hear your personal expression of your faith. We're here to talk about the budget, or we're here to talk about the dog park, which is why my dog is here. Once you start trying to interject or inject your personal belief system into the public space, that's where the problem begins.
If I could just say for a second, having done this, it really is about your personal beliefs when you present, whether it's the budget or legislation. Folks will come in. We've had Muslims that have come in and have started off with a prayer and then gone on to speak. We've had people from the socialists, communists come in, and it really is what you understand in those moments when you open it up to the public for their 3 minutes of comments. it could be comments on the subject matter, or it could be comments on anything. That's different when you actually, have it where you're only speaking to this. And so I think that's where the problem is. People are used to coming to public forums like that and expressing whatever they feel about the government.
But that's why I started my comments with the difference between the political aspect of this versus the quote unquote legal aspect of this. And in Prince George's County, you all made a conscious decision and I believe took some political calculus into your decision in terms of how this was going to be managed, which is why I said the mayor could have managed this politically another way.
That's part of the difference, I think, between this, right? There's one question of what we would call appropriateness, right? I agree that to me, it is inappropriate at that time that you're going to lead everyone in prayer when you don't know who they are. I think it's inappropriate. It is legal, though, right? I mean, we see this by the fact that this happened, the letter was sent. This same woman was invited back several months later to the next session for 3 minutes, and is invited to pray at the beginning because she's allowed to do that, right? Whatever we think of the appropriateness of it or the cultural or political aspects, she's still allowed to do it. But I think there's got to be some part of the end all be all can't always just be what the law says for me to do. As human beings, I do think appropriateness should factor into how we communicate with people politically, how we get points across. I think that has to be some part of the conversation other than I'm legally allowed to. But she's legally allowed to do this.
Then what do you say? And I don't ask this to challenge you. I think this is the next question. What do you say to those in the audience that are offended by what she is doing and decide they are going to express or articulate their discomfort with booze or whatever, however it was they chose to to articulate their displeasure?
That they do that. I mean, that's the same thing. Yeah, like they're allowed to do that. I can start a prayer. It doesn't mean you have to bow your head. It doesn't mean you have to, right? That's part of the deal. And as we've seen across the country, especially this year, and Sharon can probably tell us specifically, man, these meet the politician, let's have a talk. It gets bad from school boards all the way up to congressional representatives. But there has to be an underlying, if we say you're here to be able to communicate, then they can be. Now, the difference would be when you have the microphone, there has to be some order of this and they're allowed to do it. But when you get to the microphone, if the parrot guy's allowed to do the parrot, she's allowed to pray. Right? Well, maybe she shouldn't. I don't think the parrot should be there either, but this is...
What do you do with a praying parrot?
Oh, there you go.
Well, the long and the short of all of this is once you start to set the parameters of what's going to go on in a public forum, the idea that people are going to come in and share what's important to them, whether it's a prayer, whether it's hearing their parrot talk, once you set the environment, you have to be willing to allow it to move forward, unless you want to put in specific restrictions, but then doing that may also lead to a problem as well. There's an interesting case called Potter versus the District of Columbia, where a few years back, we had an individual who was involved in battling fires for a number of years. But then the District of Columbia decided that they were actually going to put some new rules and regulations in place that they thought was in the best interest of safety. So we have several paramedics and firefighters from different religious faiths who ended up winning a permanent injunction under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act against a DC policy that was requiring that they be clean shaven. Each of the plaintiffs that wore a beard was in accordance with their tenets of their Muslim or Jewish faith. And they were represented by counsel. They ended up getting an injunction in place. But a few years later, district officials instituted a new safety bulletin that once again was requiring responders to be clean shaven. Joy, when you see a lot of these policies that are in place, it seems as though they whip from one direction to the next. One year it's good, the next year it's not good. But at the foundation of it all is, are we going to protect people based on their religious beliefs, or are we simply going to be going from jurisdiction to jurisdiction? But then in the same breath, when we're trying to be safe, what happens when there's a possibility that your religious tenet may actually create some unsafety? I'm not sure which way we would go. How do we try to battle and come to conclusions on this?
Yeah, I mean, so often when you're dealing with a religious liberty question, the courts are going to look at it from a strict scrutiny perspective. So that means that they make sure that the government does have a compelling interest that would limit that religious liberty belief or practice, and that the government is doing it in the most narrowly restrictive means, because you do have to balance those things. That idea of scrutiny is how you balance the safety versus the religious belief of the individuals. And so clearly here, the DC court found that the government did not have a compelling enough interest that was narrowly tailored and was the least restrictive means of achieving that safety interest. And so they allowed the Muslim and Jewish firefighters to have their beard in accordance with their faith. They had a permanent injunction that covered that. And then it seems like DC just willfully ignored that and said, no, you need to shave anyway. And the plaintiffs pointed out, we have this permanent injunction. And DC said, well, we're going to move forward anyway, and we're going to move you to less desirable position with less pay, fewer opportunities for promotion. I mean, it's a little surprising to me that we're still having these conversations. The courts, including the Supreme Court, have been pretty clear about the robust nature of religious liberty, and this clearly didn't meet the strict scrutiny standard. I mean, nothing had changed in the interim. We mentioned that this policy was during 2020, but it had been created before COVID, so it wasn't in relation to any sort of updated COVID protocols. And we've seen this come up in different contexts. There's the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, RLUIPA. So this has been an issue in prisons. There's actually a Supreme Court case pending right now, Landor versus Louisiana, where it's the same question again about can people of whatever religion, I think the one pending is about a Rastafarian adherent, but there's a classic Supreme Court case, Holt versus Hobbs, where the same idea. Someone doesn't want to shave in accordance with their religious faith, and time again, we've seen that they are allowed to do that. And there could be a case where there is such a compelling interest on the government side that would be impermissible. But generally, you're going to need to make that consideration, taking pretty careful attention to the religious liberty of the faithful adherents.
Yeah, I think with the problem we're having in a multi-religious community and society we live in, and with governments trying to be, at least up until this point, trying to be more diverse in their hiring, you're going to run into these problems. But what you also run into, and I'm sure this is what happened in the District of Columbia, because I know it happened to me as somebody who was county executive of a large jurisdiction, is that you also run into the health aspects and the safety aspects. And so while there is a law saying, yes, they can, for religious reasons, have the beards, for safety reasons and insurance reasons and lawsuits, you run into the fact that you can't get coverage for your police department, your fire department, places like that. And it runs into conflict. So probably what the District of Columbia Council did was say, we're going to just rewrite this, because what we're finding is that our insurance has either gone up or there are more accidents, which is the wrong thing to do. But that's one of the reasons you see this. And it's all because what we should be doing is having a workforce that's reflective of the society that we have in there. And we need to start making safety rules and conditions where it reflects that.
Andy, I'm trying to figure out how you try to balance these safety rules against religious points of view. There's certain clothing you might need to wear from a religious standpoint, that the idea is that if you're going to be, quote unquote, a firefighter, there's certain things you can't run in there, quote unquote, wearing in order to do the job effectively. And I'm wondering, how do we get to the right balance here? Because there may be just real safety issues. For example, you cannot fight a fire probably wearing a sari. You have to be wearing certain things. It might be more difficult to have a hijab on and to have a quote unquote helmet on. I'm not sure what the answers are, but there seems like there is a possibility we may see some compelling, arguments that could demonstrate this at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think Joy nailed this at the beginning, right? There has to be some actual compelling interest of the government in this. The difficulty of this on both sides is, right, we've seen increasingly in the past 5 or 6 years, claims of religious liberty that don't seem to be about religion or liberty. And on the other hand, like with this one, there are times in which, right, you can't make an argument for aesthetic purposes or because it makes me culturally uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If it's a safety concern, it better be a real safety concern, that there are no equivalencies out there that don't bother you, right? When that happens, I think that's a compelling interest of the government, right? There's a place of you can't do this safely with this garb, with this, right, of your head covering, of your facial hair. I believe that can happen. The difficulty is in most of these cases, it's hard to say that is the absolute compelling interest. I'm not sure on this. It may be the issue of a rebreather, right? If you have a thick beard, well, then it's not going to fit well in your face and there's a safety concern. There seems to be pretty clearly other ways to handle that. It's hard for me to believe that throughout the entire world, no one's come up with a solution with men with beards to wear a rebreather that fits. And if so, man, we love the marketplace. Probably a solution is going to come anytime now, right? So there has to be some level of reality tied to these. And then it does legitimately, I think everyone has to admit, it's kind of muddy sometimes. I'm not sure this one is. The compelling interest of safety and the way that the government has gone about this, I think makes it pretty clear that that's not all it is.
Well, Wilma, it's a little tricky, though, when you start talking about insurance companies not covering you when you're in a position of this. And now the question is, you can't send somebody out there without coverage or the possibility of injury down the road when you were warned, for example, in documentation that these are the reasons we don't allow this. So what do you end up doing, or how do we battle this? Or does it really become who has the onus to create this safe environment because of this person's religious beliefs?
Well, getting back to Joy's point, I think when you start talking about insurance and to Rashawn's point as well, when you start talking about insurance and insurance coverage, that's a compelling interest. That's a compelling state interest to be able to ensure that not only are you covering your employees, but then you also have to be able to indemnify the public if they wind up suing the fire department for inappropriate behavior. So I would say that the insurance issue is a compelling issue. But part of this also, from the way that that DC presented it, it also seems to come across as an element of this is conformity and an element of this is authority. And the DC government is saying, we are not going to allow you to challenge our authority by your resistance to conform, and we don't care what your rationale is. Beard or no beard, to me, that's a pretty simple issue to resolve. Dreadlocks, if you're a Rastafarian, that could be an issue depending on the length of the locks. But even with that, there's head coverings and the way that you can tie them up that make them less, for lack of a better word, obtrusive. So a lot of this, again, seems to be authority and conformity.
Joy, what was interesting, it looked as though that authority component that Wilmer is talking about really started to kind of show its head when the idea was, well, we'll just put you in these other jobs that clearly are lower in terms of what's going on and don't have much room for advancement. It just seems as though it was almost retaliatory against authority. And that in and of itself kind of gave the impression that, wait a minute, this isn't about quote unquote beards. This seems like you want certain people in certain places. And that seems like that's a bridge too far.
Exactly, especially when this injunction was back in, I think, 2007. So these firefighters have been doing the job since then and are able clearly to do it well and competently. And then, it's just an authority move to say, well, we actually don't want you in this position. So we're going to move you to this lower role. And then I believe they even started the termination process for those employees. So real problems here on multiple fronts.
And Andrew, what's really tricky, I find out, is you have personal agendas that sometimes show up in these jobs where you just may have a new person in charge that just doesn't like certain things. And we've got to fight against that, it seems.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think Leon's point of authority seems to be the central aspect of this. And at some point, I mean, if I had a message for America now, I think it'd always just be grow up. At some point, we just got to be able to grow up. Like, you don't have everything you want, but we can find ways. Compromise doesn't make you a coward. It just makes you a grown adult. We are in a diverse society, whether you like it or not. And there has to be some aspect to where people treat people like other people. The best interest of people has to matter.
And I think you're right on point there, that the idea of we try to be in a position where you can still protect one's dignity, protect one's beliefs, and make sure that you're still doing the job well, but not doing it in a way where it looks as though you really just want to demonstrate I'm in charge and you're not. And as a result thereof, we find out hurting and creating issues that just aren't necessary. Hey, Wilmer, tell me something I don't know.
Did you know that the rotation of the Earth is slowing and that every century we lose about 1.8 seconds per day? And that I want to say about 3,000 years ago, a day was 21 hours long. We're running out of time.
Rashawn, tell me something I don't know.
Did you know that the spokesman during the Algerian Revolution, a Muslim country, was Frantz Fanon, who was not Muslim and who was not from Algeria. He was Martinique.
I did not know that. Joy, tell me something I don't know.
Did you know that a former Google engineer founded a church called the Way of the Future, which views AI as its God?
Did not know that. Andrew, tell me something I don't know.
Orland, did you know that in 18th century England, the greatest way to display your wealth and power was through pineapples? They were hard to get in the colonial system, and people who had access to pineapples would literally rent them out to other rich folks so they could display them at parties. I will not, for good measure, say what I think are modern equivalents of such nonsense, and yet pineapples reign supreme.
I've got a lot of pineapples on pictures at my house. That may explain a whole lot, you know. Appreciate all that good information there. We got to do this again soon. And thank you again for being here with us. Hope you enjoy our conversation. Just remember, if it's about God and government, it's faith and politics. See you next time.